What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Layback Podcast. Joining us today is recurring guest Dylan Newcomer. As you guys probably know at this point, we work very closely with Dylan and what he does with his athletes at Driveline in the physical therapy program there, as well as his personal group with Athletic Potential PT. Dylan has also become quite the force on social media lately. I'm remembering what seems like maybe your first viral video when you asked the world what the whole purpose of impulses were. And now we've
Yeah.
come, I was about to say full circle, but full circle is the wrong phrase there because that would mean we're right back to the beginning. I feel like we've made a 180 where we now are widely accepting impulses as a part of rehab programs and even programming them for guys pretty regularly. But that's not why we're on today. Dylan, part of the reason I brought you back is way back on episode 2 or 3, whatever it was, when you so graciously joined us and we went over the bio of how you got to this point in life. There was so much more that we could have discussed beyond just who is Dylan Newcomer and why is he doing what he's doing. Now we have an opportunity to, as I said via text, address the state of the union. And that's what I want to do today. Talk about our current state in the baseball, rehab, and performance world. And I don't think there's anyone better poised to do that than you. So thanks again for coming on. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I guess we can get right into it. I don't know how this is going to play out timing wise, but it means that we skip the bio. There goes like the first 10 minutes of content. So
Yeah.
is there anything new that's happened over the last 2 years that we need to add to the bio or the resume at this point?
No, we've been consistently hammering away at improving the rehab process at Driveline. You recently had my new partner, Jason Modafari, who now runs the Driveline Florida location. Beyond that, we're continuing to cruise, and in the future, we're looking to expand into Driveline Arizona as well and get the rehab set up there. So if there's any listeners that is in the Arizona area and wants to chat, that may be a useful avenue for some networking for me.
I'll take it. That's pretty solid. I'm glad you disclosed up front that we have as long as we are able to speak today. We'll still try to keep this pretty concise to our normal hour-ish podcast time. Hey, you said it. You have nothing else on the docket. So if we're 2.5 hours into this and we're still humming, I guess that's just what our listeners are going to have to stick with. But Dylan, right before we pressed record, you and I were kind of debriefing on a call that I had with an athlete, a call you had with a university, going over their rehab programs or the way they structure rehab. So I'm happy to push this over to you for maybe your kind of monologue to kick things off. And I'm happy to offer my take as well. Hopefully you don't steal my thunder in what I just shared to you before we press record, because I do feel pretty confident in that phrase. But go ahead, kick us off with your State of the Union monologue if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think what we were talking about before is that the state of baseball rehab and just baseball in general has just evolved so significantly to the point where everyone is now trying to play catch up. It's like, and then, you gave me a stat, and I'll let you say the stat because I don't remember. But high schoolers are throwing 95 now. Everyone is trying to chase 90 plus miles an hour if you're trying to play at any kind of a higher level, and that capacity is being achieved earlier and earlier for guys, which has created this incredibly disastrous problem for baseball rehab where we are seeing so many injuries skyrocket, but our rehab programs take forever to update. So now everyone's kind of in this scramble of like, how do we get athletes to try not to get injured? So we need to update our protocols for arm care and what we do to try to keep guys healthy and not getting injured. But if they do get injured, if they do have surgery, now it's about what do we actually need to do to update these rehab protocols to fully prepare these guys for the demands that the sport is forcing upon them. It's not like we're dealing with these one-off athletes who are just like crazy. It's every athlete that plays at any kind of a higher level that we have to start prepping for incredible demands that 10 years ago just really wasn't as common. And so now it's time for the rehab protocols to continue to get updated and push forward. And more people are coming to that light. A few years ago, like talked about in social media, it was just people kind of spamming these exercises that everyone was saying this is going to cause Tommy John itself, just doing the exercise. And now everyone's starting to kind of slowly piece through the puzzle of okay, there is application for these higher intensity stimuli that we can start to borrow and build progressions and regressions on, so that way we do actually prepare athletes for these high force demands.
Yeah, as the younger population would say now, guys are injury maxing in their
Yeah.
training programs. I'm trying to stay up with the trends. I saw a couple of those posts recently, but I do remember that on some of your posts of doing heavy loaded IR and ER work, and guys are saying like Driveline is back trying to speed run UCL tears so they can get more business. Like, you kidding me? No, like if the elbow experiences over 100 Newton meters of torque while you're throwing a pitch, that's insane. You have to try to build up a stimulus to that somehow. Of course, like that's why we do Flex Pro Grip work, but Flex Pro Grip is a very contained movement. It's not going to be a fast, rapid movement, rapid loading. At some point we do need to bridge the gap to the field, and that's where those exercises come into play. But I'm glad you left my thunder out there so I can actually kind of share it. As I shared with you first when we were about to record, I talked about how over the past 2 years, it seems like there's been some sort of illumination in the baseball world that things need to change. It's not necessarily that, as you said, not that we're necessarily doing things wrong, but we're leaving things on the table. And what we're doing is outdated and it needs a shift, given the fact that high school kids are throwing 95 miles an hour, at least the top tier guys are. Then the stat that I shared with you, which I've seen go crazy on Twitter and Instagram recently, is now that the stock fastball in right-handed major league pitchers or right-handed major league starters, so as stock can be, is a 95.2 mile an hour heater. That's bonkers. Go back
Yeah.
and tell your whatever 16-year-old self that, hey, the only chance that you're going to have to play Major League Baseball as a starting pitcher, as the average pitcher, is to throw 95.2 miles an hour. That's
Yeah.
bonkers. That means the demands of the sport, as you were saying, or the demands of rehab now are higher than they've ever been. We need to look at what we are doing, look at the systems that we are creating, and actually figure out how we can make a change. So now, Dylan, this is where the question comes in. I'd love if you could address, where are you seeing systems begin to change?
Yeah, I mean, first it starts off, I think it kind of always works private sector to more of like the institutionalized sector. You'll have coaches that are independent, that are trying new things, posting new things, and it starts to catch wind. And that's kind of what we've been talking about the last couple of years. It's this illumination of like strength and conditioning really blending into rehab and that high performance kind of bridge. And now I'm starting to see more colleges, more groups, if you will, like rehab and orthopedic groups are starting to look at how they can update their protocols and what they can learn from the strength and conditioning side. And it's really that the standard approach of care was the rehab side up to a certain point, and then there was the high performance side, and there was this giant gray area in the middle that really I think is kind of the rehab provider's new responsibility that's evolved, but not all the protocols are there yet. So that's really kind of what we're seeing is institutions and people who put out these kind of protocols are starting to update and try to fill that gray area that's developed as a result of like there's such a high demand, but the rehab protocols only got you to a certain point, and there's this space in the middle that we've had to figure out how to blend over the last couple of years.
So where do you think the farther reach is? Do you think PT is becoming more aggressive or more broad spectrum? Or is it strength coaches and high performance coaches are having a greater appreciation for the skill acquisition piece? Or is it not even just in either or? It's just everyone is realizing how intertwined this whole system is.
Yeah, I think there's a couple good answers to that question. And I think some of it is like location and just background dependent, right? Like if you're a PT that is more in the traditional clinical sense where you're, relying on insurance-based sessions, you're going to have to lean on like your high performance coaches more because your athlete is going to get cleared and discharged from PT early on. The rising popularity of kind of the cash based or just like private sector model of PT where they can operate both as strength coach or as pitching coach and as rehab provider and kind of do the full spectrum. I think you're seeing just this nice blend of PTs that have that background are blending in the direction of the strength coach. And some of the strength coaches, Anthony Castriola is a good example of this, are starting to blend downwards a little bit towards the rehab side. But, they're doing a good job of setting their kind of line of demarcation where they're not going to cross over. And then you've got the full spectrum people as well. And, I would categorize myself as someone that's more on the full spectrum just because I have the luxury of being inside Driveline and working with someone from day one all the way until they go back to spring training.
As you said, the strength coaches or the performance coaches that are putting the line in the sand. And to be fair, it probably is a line in the sand. Granted, some might be doing it in permanent ink, but I know Cassiola's cutoff is he markets himself as a return to throw coach, which is great. So you know exactly what you're getting. Now, the reason I say line in the sand is maybe that's something that even I fall into. Like with Flex Pro Grip, like yes, we're providing Flex Pro Grip, but I'm also CSCS. I was a pitching coach collegiately. I also coached infielders collegiately. So I have coached, I've trained athletes. I work specifically now with the forearm, but I can go well beyond writing a Flex Pro Grip program for a guy if someone really wants it. So to me,
Yeah.
for me, it's a line in the sand. For someone else, it might be something written in ink. But what that requires is, I think, not just the clinicians on your side or the coaches or support staff, i.e., like what I fit into, to not only have a better idea of what they do know or like a greater, I guess, a greater requirement for baseline knowledge. There's also much more of a necessity for people, especially in my shoes or Cass's shoes or anyone else on our side, or I guess even yours, to admit what they don't know. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably been a breakthrough, kind of calling back to how this conversation started, a breakthrough that we've seen in the industry of late, where people are more commonly saying, are we really so sure about this? Or like, I
Yeah.
don't know. We should probably look elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. We're really having to lean into a more multidisciplinary approach with all of this, just because we do see that athletes that go through the standard rehab process. I mean, you've encountered this, I'm sure, tons of times. I know Cass has, and many people that kind of are in this space have. They'll go and take the standard rehab protocol to a regular generic PT. And when I say generic PT, it's not like a negative term. It's just somebody who hasn't specialized in baseball. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, for the standard population, baseball is becoming so niche of a rehab specialty with these injury types that going to your generic PT will potentially put you at like risk of having a really poor outcome when you start your return to throw. Just this week, I had another athlete come through where they did the full protocol technically, but they're just nowhere near ready to start throwing. We did our objective testing, which wasn't done elsewhere because it's not part of the protocol. That's another thing that I think the industry is starting to wrap their head around is objective testing and what that means to clear somebody to throw. But, they were nowhere near ready. The rehab side wasn't even close to the non-rehab side at that point, but they had their range, they had their basics done, they did their band work, and they kind of stopped at their throwers 10. And there wasn't much going on beyond that. That's kind of the ground, is that it's becoming so niche that we need to be relying on like a multidisciplinary approach of, if you are going to a generic PT, you need somebody on the baseball side that's a good performance coach that can help you blend that. Or if you're going to a rehab provider that specializes in baseball, they may not still have the throwing skill on the back end. So you should probably have somebody ready to pick up in the return to throw and make sure that mechanically you're sound as well.
I even want to take this a step further, though, beyond the generic PT, as you phrased it, to the more sport specific, the baseball specific. For instance, there is a pro pitcher that we did our onboarding with in the past week. Lifetime peak velos in the upper 90s. I know this will mean something to you because you're very familiar with Flex Pro Grip. For the listeners out there familiar with Flex Pro Grip, this will make a ton of sense. For those who aren't, I encourage you to reach out and I'm happy to explain it more. But this is an athlete with a lifetime peak in the upper 90s. He's late stage rehab. He's about to enter a mound phase. He's been cleared to get up to about 83 to 86 miles per hour in his return to throw. And he is about 9 months removed from his surgery date. But like everything, according to a timeline, very late stage rehab. When we test him on Flex Pro Grip, we're looking at fingertip flexions around 140, mid finger flexion between 100 and 110. And then we look at his two finger numbers. So we start to look at his RFD, and he's producing force slowly. And Dylan, I know you can already picture the chart in your head. That means he's scoring on our system as a scored velocity ceiling in the low 70s. Does that mean the next throw that he makes above 73 miles per hour in his return to throw is going to be the throw that ends it all and he has to restart from the beginning? No, not necessarily. But this is a guy that is working and doing his rehab in a professional organization. He's probably been tested on force plates every single week of his return to throw, or every single week of his rehab as a whole, even prior to the return to throw. He's probably doing Nordboard stuff for his hamstrings, and he's probably doing traditional hand grip dynamometry and shoulder dynamometry, but there are still missing links. So it's not like I'm trying to use this, Dylan, for you to now call out like why Flex Pro Grip is the number one thing, but where do you think even the specific rehab professionals are missing a link or missing something? Like where are we still seeing athletes slip through the cracks, even for the baseball specific rehab professionals?
I mean, this could be a soapbox, but I'll try to keep it PG.
You can soapbox.
Yeah. No, I don't want to be disrespectful in any way to people.
Right.
People are always doing their best that they currently feel is for the athlete in front of them. And so when it comes to saying, all right, I'm a baseball specific rehab provider, that can also still just have a lot of wide variability, kind of almost based off of what camp you fall into, of like the old school, very conservative, light weights, lots of reps camp, or kind of the newer school, like, hey, baseball's really hard on the arm. Rehab also needs to be really hard to get you ready for that kind of camp. And that's kind of the newer age approach that I fall into, that many of the others are starting to kind of lean into. But at the same time, especially at the org level, you're also potentially working along with surgeons who are putting, downward restrictions on the PTs and ATCs. I know many of the people that work in some of these orgs that do have those restrictions placed on them. And even if they want to, and this isn't MLB specific, this is even, institutional places as well, and ortho groups, where the PT wants to make these adjustments, but it's kind of a downward pressure from the surgical side. This is a conversation of how much control is it for the surgeon to have over the rehab protocol. I know this is kind of a controversial opinion for the rehab setting in general, and this is almost like a pitting of surgeons versus PTs. Even though there are many great surgeons that we work with and that we really enjoy and who trust us as rehab providers, there are definitely still some oppressive is the word I'm going to use, but take that with a grain of salt. But they're set in their ways. They believe the things that they believe for the last 30 years, and they don't really like to adapt forward. And so I think you're potentially seeing some rehab providers that may be baseball specific potentially be withheld from progressing the demands simply just because that's the way things were always done. And I know you and I know certain names that we could say, but we're just not going to. But there are many people who on the rehab side sometimes feel oppressed or restricted by surgical protocols. And this is something that is difficult to take on just simply because the surgeons are the ones who do the surgeries. They are the ones that write the protocols. This is more of like a legislative level thing of how much do we let PTs take over after a certain point and all of this fun stuff. And it's something that is slowly evolving in the industry. You are seeing more PTs start to kind of break away from, not like they're disregarding the surgical protocols, but they're going beyond what the surgical protocol minimums are. But at the same time, sometimes those minimums are the hard ceiling. And so it's kind of this give and take, especially when you do have those interactions.
Obviously, a natural step is to, as a PT, break off and do the private pay cash base because you're basically operating your own silo at that point. You have greater control, greater reach. But then you still need to be significantly confident in your own approach that
Exactly.
is the right thing. But for those who might be subject to the control of a surgeon or a greater group, which is very much the case at both the professional and collegiate levels. We see that time and time again. I know athletes that have been put on major restrictions just because they showed up on campus, and it completely shifted their paths in their rehab journeys. What do you think would be the straw that breaks the camel's back that would shift the power imbalance? And I'm not saying then it enables people in your shoes to tell surgeons what to do, but it just gives the power to the people in the sense where each rehab professional can make their own decision to do what they think is best.
Yeah, I don't know if globally this will ever be a thing that gets adopted. And you know, speaking this from baseball side, but I'm sure this is an issue with, you know, there's injuries in basketball, injuries in hockey, whatever, where these things kind of happen as well, where there's kind of this downward restriction. But I don't know if it's so widespread, like PT to surgeon, that it would ever cause like a global level change of like every PT at your local ATI or Sport and Spine is going to be rallying to the legislation to be like, we need control, you know, et cetera. So I don't think it'll ever get enough headway. I think this comes down to the individual being willing to have conversations with the surgeons. I think as surgeons cycle out over time, we have great surgeons like Matt Fury, who are very much so in the newer kind of thinking, but still has a lot of great perspective from the people that he learned from that has that older approach. But I think over time, as potentially surgeons cycle in and cycle out, I've noticed that younger surgeons typically are you know, willing to allow the rehab providers to do a little bit more. So I think it's just kind of individual. Go have a conversation with the person that, you know, is potentially holding you back. Try to provide resources and educational material if they're willing to it. But that also goes down to a personality level issue at a certain point where it's like you could give all the information you want and they may just still say, this is how we do things.
You stole the name out of my mouth when you were going to finish your response. Even if you didn't say his name, I was going to say, I wish he wasn't in the operating room this morning because I was about to say, let's take a quick pause and I'll live call Matt Fury and see if we can get him to join the pod just for his perspective on this specific question. Because I would be very curious from a guy who played collegiately himself. There can't be too many orthopedic surgeons who have a Tommy John scar themselves. Obviously, Dr. Fury is in the select few. I think he should probably put that on his billboard somewhere. You might as well get operated on the guy that has the scar himself, who played at a super high level. I mean, he played at LSU, so the dude gets it. He gets the demands of the sport, not just he's not going to be the guy that's going to say like, oh, we have the advent of these new sweeper pitches or the power changeup. And I mean, I heard a take the other day that it made my skin crawl. There's no question about that. The individual being interviewed said that because the tack was taken off of the ball in MLB back in, what was that, 2022, 2023, because of the decreased tack of the ball, it enabled pitchers to finally start throwing this new sweeper because it didn't stick to their hand the same way. It's like, whoa, okay, like this is like a major jump in connection. It's maybe those two things kind of happened at the same time where the sweeper took hold of baseball, grabbed it by the throat, and every single pitcher started throwing a sweeper. But that had nothing to do with the tack of the baseball. That was just, holy shit, we can make a baseball go from right to left or left to right because of the way it interacts with the air. So that was a crazy one to me, that we have surgeons talking about pitch design. And that should not be the case. Like that's one of those things where it goes back to like us, quote unquote, little people having to admit what we do know and don't know.
Yeah.
That goes across the board. That's got to be across the board. Just because you've been to school for however many years and you've practiced as a clinician or as a surgeon for however many years doesn't give you the right to tell people what they should be doing to get hitters out. Taking that a step further, if the throwing programs and the training programs that these surgeons wrote were so freaking good, then why aren't the healthy guys doing them?
Yeah, exactly. It comes down to the people who will probably write the better things are the ones that are actually seeing it play out in real time. And that's probably one of my biggest issues with kind of the downward restrictions that do get levied on people is it's like, have you ever been in the rehab room week after week watching a guy progress past those 50-pound dumbbells that you're scared of? Have you ever been on the field with them while they progress from 50 miles an hour to 95 miles an hour over 24 weeks? Have you watched them deal with compensations and know when to pivot from the program and when to deload, or when they start having pain and you're getting these objective markers, that's when I deload, etc. If you haven't been the one that's like actually implementing the protocols, but then you're levying harsh restrictions, I think that's probably the biggest error that occurs. Is like, you need to be able to listen to the people that have to deal with the implementation and see it real time and be willing to adapt and learn and update the protocols.
I would assume a lot of the fear in that comes from something I'm going to call from another sport that I saw 2 or 3 weeks ago on Twitter. I don't know how old this video is, so I might have just fallen victim to something that popped up in my Twitter feed. But I saw a video of the Texas Tech football weight room talking about how they don't have any dumbbell because you got to be strong to play. Like, I'm going to be, I guess, maybe stretching things a little bit to fit my narrative here. But if a surgeon or someone with a significant background in the rehab space is hearing strength coaches advocating that there is no purpose for any dumbbell or any weight below 40 pounds, it's like, okay, well, this is why we can't just set people free and let them make
Yeah.
their own decisions.
Yeah, it's definitely what the statement I made, just a few moments ago, is definitely with like a heavy grain of context.
Oh, for sure.
That the
Right?
person that you're getting this recommendation from is somebody that understands what's going on and like is watching it play out in real time and has had enough volume to see trends like develop over time. So it's definitely like, don't just take the random take off the internet and be like, my protocol is getting updated. But I think the other thing that holds this back, and this is a real thing that all the medical community has to deal with, is you have insurance and liability. Insurance is only going to potentially reimburse based off of certain factors. Liability may not cover you, like your malpractice insurance, et cetera, if you are escaping the bounds of the very baseline, like this is our 80-year-old research kind of stuff. When you start dipping in your toes into the new space and there's not a bunch of data to support it, you kind of get into risky territory in the medical profession. And it's this difficult gray space that baseball lives within because these are such high force demand athletes, and rehab has not really been that thing in the past. Rehab has not had a ton of time, I would say, in the grand scheme of like being with a PT profession, to really develop enough research or have enough good questions asked in the research of like, what do these different inputs and stimuli do for a rehabbing body, et cetera, these long-term outcomes that we see. I would say ACL research is probably the only avenue that currently exists where there's a strong driving force for change and updating it and making it like really good and really top notch. It's like the one injury that affects so many sports that, like, as a group, researchers and PT providers are always like, we got to get better at this. But baseball is still too niche. Tommy John is still too niche, I think, to really have that as like a driving research force. But I think in the future, hopefully that will start to change, and then the protocols will slowly get updated over time. My old professor at Mizzou used to say that it takes like 20 to 25 years for research to reflect today's current practice.
I don't think you're wrong, or I don't think your professor is wrong by any means. I was even going to say something that a former pitching coach that used to be in an org that we were in told Daryl and I when we were rolling out Flex Pro Grip. He said, I think your technology is great. I think this has the potential to be really big in baseball. I'd give it like 5 years. From the moment we heard that, we were like, you have no freaking clue what you're talking about, bud. Like, this is it, man. Like, we have all the research to back it up. Like, this is going to be great. Like, and if we don't have the research, it means everybody else is wrong. So, like, so be it. Then that just means like everything's been disproven. And that's not the worst thing in the world either, because then we just, as an industry, have to start from scratch. But as much as I hate to admit it, the dude's been like 100% correct. Like,
Yeah.
adaptation by the industry as a whole, it takes 5 years. And then that's 5 years for the people that don't need to see the research. Those are five
Yeah.
years for the people that are willing to take the subjective feedback from others of saying, like, oh, this thing is awesome, you should do it. Or the small little not so clinical case study of objectively our players got better or objectively our players got healthier. So it'll probably
Yeah.
work for you guys too. But then, as you said, while this is going on, it takes all those years for the longitudinal studies to be conducted for someone then, however many years from now, to say, oh, yeah, that thing that we were doing 20 years ago, it actually did work. So
Yeah.
good for you guys.
And now it's like the standard part of the protocol, right? And I
And then
think
by that, then everything needs to change once
yeah,
again.
exactly. Exactly. We speaking of that, we had our friend. I would say friend. I've had a few conversations with him, but Nick Katz,
Yeah.
who's over in I think California at Berkeley, maybe.
He is from, we'll try to nail the background. He
Yeah.
goes to school in Wisconsin.
Oh,
He is
okay.
from Berkeley. He trains in Silicon Valley. So the
Yeah.
the whole study that he's been conducting, he did
Yeah.
it in the summer out at his Silicon Valley facility. But yeah, he's currently balling through his senior season right now. Uh,
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
I want to
He's
make
an
sure I
example.
get the specific shout out. So I'm gonna in the background here. I'm gonna make sure I get the school and everything correct. But yes, our friend Nick Katz. I was actually texting with him this morning.
Yeah, and he's a good example of kind of like somebody that's paying attention, is in a position to test out new things with his school, and try to start, initiating studies in these new methodologies. But again, he mentioned the limitations of the time constraints that he had and just the small population he had. It's like, yeah, one researcher, one kid that's interested in it. We're starting to get a little bit of favorable data from it, but it's going to take a much larger adoption for it to be kind of something that the industry goes, oh yeah, we can use this across the board, and here's the pros, the cons, the risks, the et cetera.
Yeah, and that's the perfect little teaser. So Nick Katz will be a future guest of the podcast. We've been planning it. Nick just has to present this specific study in this undertaking that he had at his school. He actually wants to present his thesis. And then once we get that taken care of and hopefully gets his passing grade and they let him graduate. So the school is Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. And as I said, he is having a very good year. So I'm stoked for him that he's going to be able to finish on a high note. And then eventually the point that I was making there with, or I guess piggybacking off of you, saying that he did this 11-man study of high school and college pitchers and like things were kind of raw. Every time I've spoken on the phone to him and talking about statistical significance or how many test subjects he actually had in the trial, I said, dude, none of this matters from my perspective. What matters is that somebody is going to look at the trial that you performed and say, this is not information that we have anywhere else. And they are going to want to repeat it in a more controlled environment.
Yeah.
And that never would have happened if you didn't take the first step.
Yeah. And so, we got people taking first steps, and hopefully that piggybacks into further studies and development. But I also want to slightly push back about this whole premise that we need a study, right? We know that we have all of this, and we this is a common thing in application of strength and conditioning and physical therapy. We look at studies in animal models, we look at studies in distant joints and injuries, and we extrapolate. Like this is a very common thing. So we know what things generally, like on a principle level, work for things like ACL injuries or ankle instability or whatever it may be. We have old shoulder studies, and we can extrapolate. We can borrow from our strength and conditioning principles and build upwards towards, these newer methods and stuff. And it doesn't have to be a comprehensive study. It just has to be well founded and principle based.
No, I think that's a fantastic point because if you look at the musculotendinous world, the majority of studies, I would actually love to see the breakdown in order of how often each muscle and tendon is studied. But even if we just go like super broad and we don't say like the specific tendon or the specific muscle of the quad. Generally, the quad and the hamstring are probably the two most studied muscles of the body. At least it
Yeah.
seems like. After that, then we're probably going to fall down to either the gastrocnemius or biceps. I don't know. And then maybe after that, it's the triceps. Maybe. I
Yeah.
would be very curious, though. I would have to believe that the quad and the hamstring probably account for two-thirds of total muscle tendon research that's ever been done. I mean, you'd
Yeah.
probably know better than me, but muscle tendon units still respond to load the same no matter where they are. So, like, why wouldn't we extrapolate that information? It only makes sense to. Like, what is the point of trying to bite off more than we can chew? If we already have the information and it applies, would why wait? Like, why wait for something different?
Yeah. And this goes to that tissue level stimulus adaptation, like understanding, like that foundational principle of like, if we apply a stimulus to a musculotendinous unit, a muscle belly, the ligament itself, etc., we already have like the histological like research, like, okay, what does mechanical strain do to a ligament? What does mechanical strain do to a tendon or a muscle, etc.? And what does like the adaptation look like? We can take all of that, and then we can also look at what do we do for our lower body when it comes to strength and conditioning. Like, how do we get these big global muscle groups more powerful and more resilient? We have all of these methods, from triphasic to variations of like eccentric or isodynamic or whatever fancy term you want to throw out there, of like a different kind of application. We can blend all this together to say that, okay, our J band routine, our throwers 10, is not enough. What are these principles that we would use for something else, and how do we extrapolate that and apply that to the throwing arm? And that also means that you need to understand the forces that are occurring in the throw. You need to understand that when you go into layback, like your internal rotators are under high eccentric demand. It's like a plyometric for the throw, right? So like, what do we do to build up plyometrics for the lower body? Okay, well, we can do that for the arm. Deceleration is a big component. Well, what do we do for the lower body? What can we do for the arm? How do we go beyond just like the slow eccentric? What about RFD work? What about eccentric RFD work? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You could go on and on and on of like, we already do things somewhere. We already do things for the Achilles, for the quad, whatever. We can extrapolate that and make the rehab protocols better and build a systematic process for that. And we don't need the studies to do that, really. But I think for adoption and learning, you will have to have the studies. Like, universities are not going to teach methods that are not study based. It's not going to show up on the physical therapy board exam.
I think that is the perfect encapsulation of how this change is going to happen. You generally think, and I say you as a very general term, you as the masses out there, maybe I'm projecting, but change generally comes from the lower levels, and then the upper levels are like, oh, we should look at that and
Yeah.
determine if the lower levels are correct or not. And that's likely what's going to happen if information spreads the way that we think it can. You don't need a study to tell a kid, whatever, if you stand on your head for 10 minutes a day, you'll throw 96 miles per hour. If we found out that Paul Skeens stands on his head for 10 minutes a day, I guarantee 95%, if not more, of pitchers in America are going to start trying to do a headstand for 10 minutes a day every single day. We don't need a study to tell us that that works, or it doesn't work for that matter. Because if Paul Skeens says he does it, it's like, oh, well, why not? Might as well try it at least. That is how these things are, I think, going to change. If there are enough power players, whether it's individuals with say in the industry or just the masses, mass hysteria can be good or bad. If it changes the way that we approach the industry and approach rehab, eventually the data is going to come around.
Yeah, and it's almost a little bit of it's chaotic at first. It's like reverse entropy almost. Like, things, people start doing things, the approaches start getting really varied, and then everyone's like, "Ah, this probably isn't the thing. Let's narrow this down. The scope down to what we are finding consistently across the board works." That's an analogy for like my practice as well. Is like, I've dabbled in a few different approaches, and you have to dabble appropriately, meaning like you can't just apply it to a kid that it has no means trying something out, right? But if you built it up, if you're ready to experiment with it, you try it. You even try it on yourself first, right? That's kind of the old adage of like, if you aren't confident doing it, you shouldn't be giving it to an athlete kind of deal. But you start to experiment with these different approaches, okay? Because a long time ago, impulses would have been like, what are we even doing? Why are we doing this? This is dangerous, etc. But now it's like, oh, okay, we can really fine tune this to what is useful. Rapid eccentrics or kind of the drop catches that some coaches are doing now. Okay, well, that makes sense. We do altitude landings, we do plyometrics, we can do this for the upper body, but how do we do this safely? These are smaller tissues. So it really just comes down to like, try it out, trial it in a safe, controlled environment, figure out what does and doesn't probably work, and then distill that down to advance your practice.
I even think we can step this back a little bit. One of the places that we've seen this across the board is in the way we program S&C. And I feel like this is a topic that gets talked about anytime I have anyone with an S&C background on the podcast. So I apologize if this sounds like rinse and repeat to everyone else that's out there. But again, the example is we tried to get so specific for so long, where at the end of the day, the equation is if we have athletes who are really strong and can produce force quickly, they're going to be the best athletes possible.
Yeah.
Like we don't need to have every one of our baseball players do split stance, internal rotation movements while holding a glove in their left hand or holding a 1.5 pound weight in their left hand to simulate having a glove and like 2 finger grip on a cable because that's how they're going to be holding a ball. That's so unnecessary. It's not going to create, although it might look more like the sport because you are in a split stance, you're at ball release, you're doing these things. It's significantly less sport specific because it comes nowhere close to producing the loads that you will actually experience in the sport. So what would be significantly more sport specific is yanking the hell out of something that is going to simulate what we talked about earlier, those 100 plus Newton meters of stress on the medial elbow, or the crazy fast degrees of motion that we're covering with the shoulder, or the shearing forces that we're going to experience, or the ground reaction force that you're going to experience landing from a depth drop.
Yeah, and I think that's a good clarification to add. Like when we've been talking about, advancing rehab, it's still this principle level, fundamental level, tissue level stuff. It's just that we're realizing that from an arm perspective, from an upper body perspective, we haven't gone to the necessary lengths. It's not like, we aren't just creating random exercises, random applications that look fancy. You're trying to take the principles that are fundamental to tissue adaptation and preparation for stress and apply that. And there are exercises that or applications of the intensity, the volume, etc., that stimulate those that we have to achieve. And that's what's been lacking. We haven't gone far enough. We haven't gone to great enough length in rehab. We stopped too early. It's not that we're coming up with crazy exercises that are harmful or threatening to the protocols or the surgical procedures themselves, but it's that we're continuing to progress beyond just like the basic stuff.
So I'm going to ask you to speculate now. I'm sure you went through this at a certain point. We certainly did in our own progression in building Flex Pro Grip. Why do you think so many rehab professionals out there, or even baseball specific skill coaches for that matter, or high performance coaches, fall short when it comes from applying the tried and true methods for the lower body or for pec development and doing bench press, doing these things that have been done forever? And then when we go to apply it to the forearm or the shoulder, it's like we've never trained a human being before, or we've never exposed somebody to forces before. Why do you think that breakdown exists? And what do you think needs to be done for people to take that next step?
I think it's just the old narrative of like small muscle groups. We always just say they're endurance muscles, so train them for endurance. It's like, yes, they're endurance, but endurance in training often means low load, high volume, like the capacity to go for a long period of time, not withstand immense force for 75 plus pitches in an outing over and over again. And I think it was just this poor understanding at the time, or poor description at the time of like, what does it mean for it to be an endurance tissue? right? Well, in the context of this sport, it's a very different thing than like a runner. But that narrative has lived on, and that's kind of what has been taught. And so it comes from the ground level, like we've been talking about this entire time, slowly starting to cross the board. Coaches are saying, yeah, baseball's really hard. We have to adapt. We have to go further with the loading protocols. So yeah, it started with the narrative, I think, in the past of just like, these are endurance muscles, do your 3 sets of 25 1-pound weights, and we're realizing that's just not good enough.
Here's another hyper specific example of something that will encapsulate this discussion of what it means to actually have endurance the way that we need it in the sport of baseball. And I'm going to be taking a couple liberties. I don't know if this is the specific player, but because I'm not working with him on this, I'm going to guess on who it was based on when the discussion occurred and the way these things played out and me just connecting dots in the background. Andy Galpin appeared on the Huberman podcast a couple years ago. He's a recurring guest there, but this specific event that I'm talking about was a couple years ago. He talked about working with a professional baseball pitcher who I am 99% sure is Trevor Bauer, based on Bauer referencing Andy Galpin on a couple things that he has discussed. And they were looking at tissue endurance in the way that he needs his body to function to be a high level starting pitcher. So one of the tests that they were looking at was repeat max effort counter movement jumps. So truly a single effort bout. How high can I jump on a counter movement? And basically, how long can I sustain that max height? I'm calling from something 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know. And it was probably even longer now. I don't know if max height was what they looked at. It could have been impulse, could have been braking forces, but whatever. Dr. Galpin told Trevor, like, okay, when you fall outside of 4% of your peak, let me know. And that will determine if we need to adjust anything in your training. The story goes that like 106 counter movement jumps later, Trevor calls Galpin and say, like, I'm only 2% off. Like, what do I do? And Galpin's like, no, you're good. Like, you probably should have stopped like 40 reps ago. This is not a stimulus that we need to expose you to anymore. But that's the reason I even bring up that story, is that's endurance in baseball. How often can you repeat max effort? It doesn't mean you don't need endurance, but it also doesn't mean you need the endurance of a triathlete. What you need to
Yeah.
be able to do is repeat and handle max loads over and over and over and over and over again. And that goes back to what you were saying way back at the beginning of where people are finally realizing we need to do something different in rehab when high school pitchers are going out and throwing 95 miles an hour. And because they're a high school pitcher, that also means they're playing either shortstop, first base, catcher, or center field. And
Yeah.
then they're having to do that 95-mile-per-hour throw for the game that they're starting on the mound on Tuesday, and then they're going to have to close the game out on Saturday. And in between, they also played shortstop, center field, first base, or catcher on Thursday.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think one of your protocols that highlights as well, like, this is a trainable thing, right?
It's
Like,
very
one of
trainable.
the
Yeah.
Flex Pro Grip endurance protocol is this in practice for the forearm flexors, and this is kind of the end stage stuff. Like, we don't throw guys into endurance training right 3 weeks out of Tommy John. This is not stuff that we're trying to prepare them that early for, but best believe it that before I'm letting them get to a certain level in their velo, they have done their RFD and their endurance, and they have done other things for their shoulder and their upper body that has pushed them to like exert over and over again. And I think it's also important to note, you don't have to do it 100 times when you're training. The endurance protocol, there is this diminishing returns whenever it comes to any kind of training application in the weight room. It's not like we're saying you throw 75 pitches, you have to do these 75 reps to be prepared for it. It's just that we are training the tissue to have this endurance high output stimulus that we're putting into it. So that way, when you take the skill itself and you progress towards that goal, you have the physical foundation to actually make progress and recover from the skill stimulus that you're putting on it. And I think that's another important note, is like, the skill is the stimulus as well. it's not just that the rehab or the training will solve all of this. It is the combination of building a physical foundation that prepares you for the gradual progression you will take in the skill reacquisition whenever you start your return to throw and you start getting back on the mound and you start doing these things. If you don't lay that foundation on the physical side and get the tissues exposed to those stimuli, the skill becomes the only stimulus, and that can be very detrimental, especially at high levels, whenever the skill is just way outpacing the physical capacities you've been exposed to. So it's definitely this give and take. There is a relationship between the two. It's not just like, hey, I can get you right in the rehab gym, and tomorrow you'll be able to go out and throw 100 pitches because you did these exercises. You've got to still build the skill up.
For sure. It is weird to make a shift, like and actually call for a shift in discussion, but based on you saying the demands of the sport outpacing where we're at in rehab or the preparedness of the athlete, I want to latch onto that for a moment. That kind of goes back to the rapid flexion testing example I gave for that professional pitcher way back. I don't even know how many minutes ago that was in the podcast. I wish I had a running counter with our chapters so I could go see that. It was probably like 40 minutes ago for all I know. But speaking on athlete preparedness, I want to talk about what we're seeing in the initiation of return to throw and return to performance programs. You and I have worked very closely on this. We obviously think very similarly. So I don't want this to just be like a pat on the back to one another discussion for like how good of programs that we feel we created or like how amazing these programs are. Like, yeah, of course, we think they're really good programs. Otherwise, we wouldn't have put them out there and we wouldn't have put our names on them. But that doesn't mean every athlete is going to feel the exact same way that we do about the programs that we created. There are other programs out there that other athletes are going to do. For example, one of the athletes that I spoke to recently was encouraged before he even considered the return to throw, before he even consider getting in the weight room, was to take 6 weeks off to literally just chill post surgery and let everything calm down. Why is that potentially good if you are going to look at it with rose-colored glasses? Like, what would be the potential benefits, just so we can try to give some good credit there? And then from the biases that you and I possess, why is that the wrong thing to do?
Well, I think the context is this a healthy athlete or a post-op athlete?
This is a post-op athlete.
Well, there's always an ongoing debate in a lot of different surgical procedures of like active versus passive rest. Rotator cuff repairs is like a good example of this, where there is still like a very heavy camp of like delayed range of motion versus like early range of motion, and how aggressive you want to be in those first 6 weeks. And like some surgeons are like, yeah, get them moving really quickly after surgery, and other surgeons are very much so like, don't move at all. And I think from one standpoint, the don't move at all crowd, like the chill crowd, is essentially saying, let the body heal, let the body take care of it on its own, and then we'll worry about doing this later. And I think that on paper that sounds okay, until we start to think about, okay, well, what drives healing? Well, like, these are all tissues that respond to mechanotransduction. Like, the electrical signal of movement is how all of these cells work. The stimulus of load are how all of these cells repair themselves. And while there is this getting out of the way and letting the body do its thing, we can also provide the necessary like inputs to make sure that that process is well organized for the body. A good example of this is like, if we know if we tear a ligament or a tendon, like collagen lays down super disorganized, and it gets organized through mechanical loading. So I think our bias is, well, we want to be doing as much as we can as early as we can and not have an athlete sit around for 6 weeks. And I would argue that that's the better response, just simply based off of like the research that we have. And it comes with a responsibility when you're in that camp of understand the procedure that was done and like what you should not be doing and how safely you can progress things. Because if you are in the camp of move early, you can do too much and you can disrupt what the surgeon did. So this kind of goes back to that 45-minute ago take of like surgeon versus rehab. And the surgical protocols were there to prevent their surgery from being disrupted, right? So like be conservative, don't let the surgery get disrupted. But at the same time, we've learned in a lot of different injuries that like there are necessary steps during that time period. And as long as we put the necessary constraints on, we should be moving probably more than not.
I'm going to add a non-data driven take here, and actually on both sides. So I will provide both the counter argument and supporting argument. I think a pretty quality counter argument to our bias is by taking time off, you potentially are giving the athlete separation from the event. You're letting everything calm down, nervous system calm down. Maybe they can become emotionally well just because of the trauma associated with the surgery, both physical and emotional trauma. I'm not trying to say that surgery isn't hard and athletes should all just get right back to the training and go grind because that's what we do. So yeah, there's a piece of that, and there probably is a case for some athletes that just need the separation. They went through a lot. They want some time away from the sport. However, we can literally flip that exact counter argument on its head to the supporting argument for a much softer point, which is athletes are generally creatures of habit and they feel much better when they have their routine and they have everything in place. When you're talking to a collegiate pitcher, a professional pitcher, a high level high school pitcher, they understand what they need to do to be as good as possible. And generally, being in the weight room or being in the training room and stressing themselves physically are things that they enjoy doing beyond just something that is going to help them recover due to all the fancy terms that you threw at us. I do think there is a significant positive emotional and mental response that comes from maintaining the routine of getting back to doing work, even if you're not addressing the surgically repaired UCL of your right arm. If you go back in, you're doing leg extensions and leg curls and hip abduction work 2 weeks after surgery. I don't know. I tend to feel that you're going to feel much better just as a human being
Well,
because
yeah,
that's what you've always done.
we just generally know exercise makes people have better moods, better emotional stability, etc. Like that's the Huberman podcast 101, right?
Right. Yeah. Hey, get
Like,
out and move. Get out
yeah,
and move.
exactly.
Find something that works for you. This is all the crazy stuff that I do. But if you just like get out in the sun for an hour a day, and if
Yeah,
you find a 30-minute workout routine that you can do 5 days a week, you're going to feel a heck of a lot better. Now, here's all
yeah,
the data that I do on my own body. But that
yeah,
like that's the podcast. You're right.
yeah. And I can't tell you how many athletes that I've done post-op where we start lifting when the surgical site is healed and we can start sweating and the
Hmm.
risk of infection is gone basically or very much diminished, and that's kind of the early like first 10 days where we don't really want the athlete getting too sweaty or too disgusting because of infection risk. Once that's done, we start lifting 3 to 4 days a week. We have conditioning 2 to 3 days a week. And it's built around whatever injury has occurred, whether it's the shoulder, elbow, or anything else. I can't tell you how many times I've had an athlete say, "Oh, it feels so good to move again and to train again." And I can't think of one athlete where they've said, "I wish I would have sat down for the next 4 weeks and not done anything." The other caveat, bias or piece to add to our argument is I've seen the outcomes of the individuals that did the 6 weeks of chill or just like very low level. I'm only going to do range of motion on my elbow for 6 weeks, but only range of motion up to a certain point as well. And they didn't go to PT because the surgeon said, don't go to PT for 6 weeks. And those guys have a lot more issues. They're stiff, they're really uncomfortable, they're painful to regain the range of motion because 6 weeks is a long time to not be moving a joint post-op. You're going to atrophy like crazy. The capsule is going to start to stiffen, all this other stuff. So I think 6 weeks is extreme. 2 to 3 weeks, I think it's much more reasonable. And I think in general, we know that movement is better than not. Now, back to like the emotional stability standpoint, I think that applies at any point in any athlete's career, where sometimes it's step away for a week, step away for 2 weeks, where it's like you either need to get a new perspective on how you want to approach these coming months and years, or you just like need help, stop stressing about the injury, stop stressing about what your arm feels like on a day to day. go on vacation. I've had multiple athletes that go on vacation and suddenly all the little aches and pains that they were feeling are just like washed away when they get back. They're like, I feel so amazing now. The little ache I've had in my bicep, this whole rehab is gone, etc. They don't think about it anymore. So there is definitely this emotional stability component of get away from the process for small periods of time and don't just be so ingrained in it. Don't make your entire identity about how my arm feels today in this process, and don't stress yourself out to the point where like you're losing perspective on your larger life as well. Most athletes aren't going pro. And that's something that, I've talked with a few athletes before in the past is like, hey, put this into perspective. Like, we're rehabbing this because you love baseball, but baseball is like 3 years of your life. What's after that? Let's also consider like what comes after baseball and like what you're interested in and like what makes you happy outside of that. Because I think sometimes in the rehab setting and in this like go hard, grind, get back, be dominant on the field mindset that you can have with baseball, you also get lost in it and forget that like this is a game that's only going to be very short term in your life. And like go consider what happens after college, because right now you have like you're just taking your one random class a quarter to play baseball. But like what's going on afterwards, bud?
I apologize if this is something that I just missed because I got so caught up in like, where are we going next? Where are we going next? But the reason we even went this route is if you take the time off, there's a really good chance you're just stuck playing catch up at the end. And if you're stuck playing catch up, you're not going to be in a healthy place long term. You're just taking on so much more risk. Now, of course, if it means you have to take breaks, if we want to address all those things, I totally agree with you. I say time and time again, it's amazing what a clear mind can do for the body. When you're good up in the mentals, the body generally feels a lot better. Granted, if you're stressing yourself physically, I like to think that impacts the mentals positively, and then the body as a whole is going to feel better. But just clearing the head, clear the mechanism, Bull Durham, that stuff generally works. If it means go get away, by all means, go get away. There's no question it's easy to get caught up in the rehab process and really find yourself down a pretty bad spiral of how am I ever going to respond from this, which is kind of like the Cassiola approach of labrum isn't real. Like if you just acknowledge that it never happened, you're probably going to be good. If you can legitimately erase it from your mind that you ever got hurt, you should be okay.
Yeah. There's a good mental component to this that, and this is that every athlete is an individual case standpoint. And while the rehab protocols over time will update and get better and we'll continue to push that forward, you still have to look at the person just like right in front of you. What do they need? What are they ready for? What can I do with them to help them get there? What's that old cartoon show? I don't know. I may be showing my age, but Spice Girls or something, where it was like they
Powder Puff Girls.
Powder Puff Girls, yeah, like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Everyone gets a unique mixture.
Exactly. There you go. Come on. Yeah, Spice Girls. I don't know, man. No, Powder Puff Girls. Yeah, spice, everything nice, and then like all the superpower stuff that got tossed in there too. I can see the intro happening in my mind, so don't worry, I'm with you. We're the same age demo, so it plays out for both of us. Now, Dylan, as we've recorded for a little over an hour at this point, or maybe right at an hour, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know where time is anymore. It's made up. It's all a construct, anyways, and we're just living it day to day. But now that we've addressed where the industry is, where are you at? What do you have coming down the line? What have you been working on? Is there anything that you're able to share that you think will either push your athletes forward or hopefully push the industry forward? Now, of course, if there are things that you got to keep under wraps, go ahead, keep them under wraps, because I know we're working on some projects together that I think will be really cool once they do come out, but I don't know if we're at a point of sharing all that.
Yeah, I'm happy to share it. I'm working on an application that is built around like how we program return to throws in general. And it's just like putting the power of everything that I've tried to learn and try to implement into coaches' hands. I'm not sure when that will come out or when I'll start marketing it more, but it's definitely like something I'm excited about. And as far as Driveline goes, as far as like my in-person practice goes, for me, it's just like, how do I get better at working with the individual? And I think that's something that has been a very unique experience that I've had at a Driveline is I get to go out and play catch with somebody every day. and like coach them every day. And what I realized is that no one person responds to what I did with the last person the same. And to me, trying to push that kind of knowledge into the field is really where my focus is just like, hey, these are things that I'm learning at the same time. Just, I do get the unique opportunity to play catch with people as a PT, to like work with them on the throwing side as a PT. And I know that's something that people are hungry for. So continuing to help people in that direction is kind of like my long-term outlook as well. And maybe that's a CEU course, maybe sometime, or maybe that's, building out a community at some point of a place to learn. But right now it's just head down, work with the athletes I have, and work on the little application I'm doing in the background.
Awesome. Well, then before I do let you go, because we're probably good at this point, do you feel there's anything that we missed? And for all I know, anything that we missed is going to lead to another 20 minutes, but feel
Uh,
free. If that's the case, that's the case.
no, I think we've probably rambled on a good amount at this point. I could bring things up that lead us to another discussion of 15, 20 minutes, but I think that just escapes the scope of where we're at right now.
For sure. Well, I think we will have you back on prior to another 2 years of requiring a new State of the Union. But it really didn't seem like it was that long because you were on for the Baseball Rehab Network discussions. And of
Yeah,
course, I released those as podcasts. And then because I'm Zooming with you once every 2 weeks, anyways, it feels like way more podcast episodes to me than being on episode 2 or 3 and now episode, I think
like
this will be
200
110. No,
10.
110. 110.
Okay,
We're 2 years into it. 200 would be crazy.
that would be crazy.
But hey, we're one episode a week every single week since we
Yeah,
started this back in March of, would that be 2024?
yeah.
Haven't
It's a
missed.
good rate. It's a good hit rate.
It is. Yes, of course, some higher than others. You were number one listened to episode all time for a long time, and unfortunately, you've lost that crown.
You guys
Yeah,
have grown a bit.
yeah, but you should have volume stats from being so early. So maybe we can bring this back, and this one will do well for you. I'll be sure
Yeah.
to keep you posted.
All righty. Sounds good.
Yeah, you can talk some smack to your boy Bryce Kreider because he is either up there as number one or number two all time now. His
Nice.
went crazy. So go find him at the facility, or no, he's down in Tampa now. I
He's in
forgot about
Florida.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He left dreary Kent for sunny Tampa. But
Yeah.
next time you guys are on like a team call, talk some smack and tell him you're coming for him. But I guess maybe I shouldn't have mentioned him here because this is gonna stay in the episode, and this is gonna be like, oh, I didn't listen to that one. Let me go back and listen now. Who knows?
Yeah. Plug. It's all
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So Dylan, drop once again how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, you can go to my Instagram, the Baseball Physio. You can reach out to me there, or you can go to my website, athleticpotentialpt.com, or if you want, you can reach out to Driveline themselves if you want to get in touch with either myself or my partner, Jason Modafari, down in the Tampa location. If for any reason you want to chat, whether it's a professional, an athlete that wants to rehab, whatever it may be, I'm always happy to take calls with anybody in the industry as well if they just want to talk shop. So.
And I guess before I do let you go, is it an official requirement to be below 5'10" if you're going to serve as a physical therapist for athletic potential, as you're
No, it's
looking to
not.
potentially hire in Arizona?
No, hopefully our Arizona guy is at least like 6'8" to make up for
Yeah, so then you guys are coming out with an average height of
it.
6'1".
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone who doesn't get the inside joke there, Jason Modafari, Dylan's partner, as he's mentioned a couple times, is a little muscle hamster, as he's called
Yeah,
himself. I think he's about 5'5", but he is probably stronger than your entire team put together if it comes to
probably.
total
Yeah.
weight lifted.
Yep.
But everyone go check out Jason's episode of the Layback Podcast as well, and he'll tell you a little bit of his bodybuilding background and
Yep.
just how strong he really is.
He's a jack dude.
Yes, he is. There's no question about that. And I love what it's enabled him to do and how he's kind of connected the dots into the baseball world for
Yeah.
these very interesting opposing demands. But Dylan, this was fantastic. I appreciate the time today and your willingness to, I don't know, maybe turn a few heads maybe offer a couple hot takes. We'll see where this
Yeah.
goes, but hopefully it leads to what you and I love, which is follow-up conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Of course, and to all the listeners out there, thanks for laying back with us.